Thank you all for coming out. My name is Kelly Burton, and I want to state at the beginning that the views expressed in this talk are my own and don't represent any of the institutions I may be affiliated with. I would also like to say that even though my talk is what is Christian philosophy, I don't really think there's such a thing as Christian philosophy, just philosophy. Just like there's not Christian mathematics, there's not Christian philosophy. But there is a long, rich historical tradition of Christian philosophy, Christians involved in doing philosophy. And that's what I was studying at the time I was asked to come talk here. So that's how I arrived at this topic for today. I was reading Jill Sun's book, Christian Philosophy, and it raised a lot of questions in my mind, some of which will come out in this talk today. I'd like to share a little bit of my background with you so that you can see why I'm approaching the topic as I am and why this topic. This is probably under cultural apologetics, my talk, maybe even the foundation of cultural apologetics. So my background, I have been a Christian for 24 years, and I've been in the secular academy for those 24 years. So I came to Christ through philosophy. So that's how I'm interested in this topic. It's kind of one and the same for me. I've been part of teaching in the secular academy for the past 16 years. So I've run in the following circles. Maybe you've heard of some of these. Reformed epistemology, Thomism, Neo-Thomism, natural law. These are some of my background. Analytic philosophy, where I've done most of my training at Arizona State University. I've been involved with analytic theology, the great books recently. Postmodernism, that was a long time at ASU. And apologetics for the past 5 years. I've been involved locally and nationally. So some of this is my background, and it's part of the questions that I have. So I give you this background because a common theme that I've encountered in all of these contexts is that nobody can really know for sure. Have you heard this? Nobody can really know for sure. This is skepticism. And it comes with a religious version. Nobody can really know for sure, but you just got to believe. And I think we do this to preserve meaning. You see what happens with skepticism, and we want to preserve meaning, so we just believe anyway, right? We'll call this fideism, faithism. So I think both of these are dissatisfying for a lot of us. For me in particular, as a person involved in philosophy, and classically philosophy was the pursuit of knowledge. So when you say nobody could really know for sure, you're saying you don't get to do philosophy. So I think there's a mistake here with saying nobody can really know for sure. This may be the controversial part of my talk. I'm going to say, I think we can know things for sure. Some things, the basic things. So I'm going to propose an alternative to skepticism and fideism, which are dominant in our culture today. And that alternative we'll call clarity. That some things are clear. Some things are clear to reason. All right? Now let's begin with just this. Let me know if this is clear. Either some things are clear, or nothing is clear. I'm going to put it on the board. Some things are clear, or nothing is clear. Now, why do I put it like that? Because if I were to do this, that's called the square of opposition in logic. These are direct contradictions. They can't both be true, and they can't both be false. So it has to be one or the other. Now, if we go with nothing is clear, then we can't really know. We can't really know. Nothing is clear. I mean, think about that. What I'm saying right now is not clear. But it does seem like what I'm saying right now is clear, at least something, right? So if we go with nothing is clear, then there's no meaning. And if there is no meaning, then we're left with skepticism and fideism. And what happens with that? No philosophy. What's the alternative? Sophism. The sophists were the group of rhetoricians that Socrates was opposed to many times in the dialogues of Plato. Now, what happens if some things are clear? If some things are clear, at least minimally some basic things are clear, like maybe the distinction between A and non-A, being and non-being. So if some things are clear, then we could say that their basic things are clear. We wouldn't want to go to non-basic things first. We would go to the most basic things. Now this is the exciting part for us. Oops. What are these basic things, the fundamental things? Well, the fundamental things are philosophical things, like the existence and nature of God. Does God exist or not? It seems like that would be a fundamental question, right? A fundamental question of philosophy. So can we know whether God exists or not? That's going to be the thing, right? If we can't know, then what's going to happen? All right, so here's another piece of philosophy. All right, so maybe the basic things that we're concerned with today are the existence of God, the nature of God, human nature, what is a human, and what is good and what is evil for humans. Can we know those things minimally from philosophy, from reason, from general revelation, before we approach it through Scripture? All right. Now, philosophy is about knowing things, historically, classically, and proving things. So knowing involves proving, and this seems to be the thing that our age is really reluctant to do, or they think we can't do it. So I'm going to maybe challenge that a little bit, and I challenge you to question those dominant assumptions we really can't know. Now, I'm going to open this up for discussion at the end, so please write down questions you might have. You're free to disagree with me. I invite it. It helps me to grow, and you can give me good objections. I'm going to turn to the handout now, though. All that leading up to the handout, right? And I think this needs a little bit of coffee. Okay. Also on the handout, I have my name and my contact information. I have a website there with some of the work I've been doing. I hope to have a video of this session, and I'll put it there when it's ready. My email address is listed here too. If you have questions about the content of the talk that you would like to email me about, that would be great. So I have 3 quotes that we're going to start with. 2 from St. Paul, 1 from C.S. Lewis. And I'm going to walk around. I can't just be stuck. It doesn't work for me. All right, so the first quote: "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world." So a lot of people read this and go, "Ooh, stay away from philosophy. It's bad," right? How many of you have had that impression that philosophy is bad? Paul warns us not to go there. Oh, good. All right, so we're going to look at this quote. C.S. Lewis says this: "Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered." So I like this quote because he's not saying stay away from philosophy. He's saying we need philosophy because we need to fight bad philosophy. So I'm going to use that concept of good and bad philosophy as part of my argument today. And then St. Paul again, in Romans 1:20, he says, "What may be known about God is plain, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." So this is where we get the idea of some things are clear, and it has to do with the eternal power and divine nature of God, so that men are without excuse. So that's going to be part of my argument. So my goal today in this talk is to give an apology for philosophy. It's like an apologetics for apologetics. A defense of philosophy. And not just philosophy, but for Christians to do philosophy well. I always have this idea of Daniel being 10 times better than the wise people of his day. So I feel like Christians should be 10 times better than the wise people of our day. So that's what I mean by well. Not just I can do philosophy, I can hold my own, but how well can you do it? Can you Well, I'll see what's implied in doing good philosophy well. All right, so here's my argument. And this may be where you want to find objections. If you are human, you are engaging in philosophy, either consciously or unconsciously. This is a human enterprise, we all do it. You either are engaging in good philosophy or bad philosophy. All right? Christians ought to be engaging in good philosophy. Good philosophy includes showing what is clear about God from the things that are made. So I'm taking my argument from those 3 quotes, and you're free to disagree with any one of those. So here are my assumptions. Humans engage in philosophy. It's a human enterprise, and I'll show why as we go along. B, there's a distinction between good and bad philosophy. And this is going back to Socrates versus the sophists. He thought there was bad philosophy, or something that went under the name of philosophy that wasn't philosophy at all. So we'll talk about that too. There's a moral obligation for Christians to be engaged in good philosophy. No, there's a moral obligation. What? But I'm not a philosopher. I'm just a mom, or I'm just an electrical engineer. We'll see. Are you just that? Good philosophy requires showing what is clear. Okay, this is going to be the part that may be the challenge, may be new. All right, first let's talk about what is philosophy. I have 5 features of philosophy listed here. And you can get these 5 features by studying what Socrates does in Plato's dialogue. Socrates is one of the first philosophers, the first to engage in this dialogical approach, seeking truth. So the first feature of philosophy is that it's an area of study. It's a discipline, and the area of study has to do with foundational questions. So we talk about 3 branches of philosophy. The first branch is called epistemology, the study of knowledge, or the study of how we know things. This has been my area of emphasis, epistemology, how do we know? The second area is called metaphysics. Metaphysics studies what is real, what is ultimate reality like. Modern and postmodern philosophy has largely abandoned this project of trying to figure out what is real. They think we can't do it. So I would like us to question that assumption. And then the third area is ethics. Ethics asks, what is the good? What is good, what is evil, and what is the good, the summum bonum? We've also abandoned that concept as well, because when you abandon metaphysics, you abandon the good that's objective and true for everybody. It's basically what's good for you is good for you. What's good for me is good for me. But philosophy has as its study what is the good. All right, so that's the foundational questions. How do I know what is real and what is the good? Okay, basic questions. Philosophy is an attitude, and Socrates kind of demonstrates this attitude. It's the love of wisdom. And think about love not like agape love, like eros love, like romantic love, like passion. So being passionate about wisdom, that takes a kind of drive to pursue it, right? So philosophy has a drive to pursue wisdom. That's what the word philosophy means, love of wisdom. So should we be in love with wisdom? What would that look like? Third is a method. Philosophy definitely has a method, and this seems to be the part that we emphasize the most in the discipline of philosophy. As the method of philosophy, we use reason critically to test statements, judgments for meaning, words for meaning. Socrates is always doing this. What is beauty? What is beauty in itself? What is justice? What is knowledge? So we use reason critically. This is the tool for philosophy, reason. We don't have a lab. We don't use our senses. I mean, we might, but not primarily. The tool of philosophy is argument, reason. And by reason is meant the laws of thought. So they have 3 laws. The law of identity, A is A thing is what it is. Marker is marker, rock is rock, person is person. The law of non-contradiction, and this is a big one, it can't be both a rock and a non-rock in the same respect and at the same time. It can't be both some things are clear and nothing is clear in the same respect and at the same time. And then the third law is the law of excluded middle, either or. It's either a marker or it's not a marker. Now these 3 laws are the basis of reason, the starting point, and we go from there and we make judgments and we make arguments and we test them. So that's the method of philosophy. Think of this critical analysis, the method. And then third is an application. we apply philosophy to ourselves in self-examination. Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's less than human life to go through life unconsciously, unthoughtfully. So we apply it to ourselves. What do I think is eternal? What do I think is the good? Why? Do I have good reasons for that? And then lastly, philosophy is a system. And this may be more connected to this conference. It's a world and life view. And we use philosophy, we use reason to make sure the whole system fits together, that there are no contradictions in the system. So do my views about how we know things fit with my views about what I could know? If I start off saying, we can't know anything, then how do I live my life? Are those things consistent? So this system building may be called the constructive use of reason. We construct a coherent world and life view. In class, I often draw a picture of a house. We're sitting on ground, a foundation, and then you have the ground, and then you have a foundation. This is your metaphysics, the foundation, and the house is your ethics, the whole way you live your life out. And that's part of philosophy too. So a system of truth, we can see, is that system of truth in something we're going to talk about as Christian philosophy. All right, now we already talked about philosophy and sophistry. They're kind of opposites. So philosophy would say some things are clear, sophistry would say no. So they're opposites. Now what is bad philosophy? I've had to think about this quote from St. Paul a lot, right? Because I hear it often. You're a Christian and you're doing philosophy? How is that possible? And you're doing it in the secular academy? Well, how do you express your faith? Well, I don't. I seek truth, and truth is universal for everyone, right? So how do we avoid bad philosophy? What is hollow philosophy in this quote? So he says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow philosophy. What would that be? So I thought about this a lot. It seems like hollow is empty. And we do this a lot, or worldly philosophy does this a lot. We empty words of meaning. Think about I use this term semanticide in a document I recently wrote, the killing of language. And semanticide has roots in logicide, the killing of the logos. So this is deep, and it's bad when we empty words of meaning. An example I've seen lately is someone saying being can come from non-being. Being can come from non-being. What does that even mean? Just maybe turn on the news and you'll see semanticide happening. All right, deceptive philosophy. What is deceptive philosophy? Deception is false, right? It's untrue. So there are lots of false assumptions in the history of philosophy. Here's an example, and I'm willing to be challenged on this. In the history of philosophy, it starts with this assumption that matter is all that exists and matter is eternal. Naturalism, right? A Christian would have to say that's not a true assumption. But that assumption permeates so much of our thinking and our culture. So bad philosophy creeps into Christian philosophy. All right, human tradition, I've listed a few here. I'm connecting human tradition to uncritically held assumptions, particularly our assumptions about how we know things. Here's a few human traditions that creep into our thinking. Empiricism. This is the view that all that we could know is through our senses. If you can't see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, you can't know it. God can't be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched, so God must not exist. Or the human soul doesn't exist. Right? Rationalism, in the history of philosophy, this view has tried to use reason to pursue truth directly. It has fallen into unfavor. People don't like rationalism. Probably that gives you the heebie-jeebies even thinking about it, right? Rationalism was Plato was a rationalist. He tried to pursue truth directly, and it turned out his view of ultimate reality was not supported by reason. So rationalism could be a source of skepticism. It's a human tradition that leads to skepticism. How about intuitionism, where we take the sign to be the reality? This is also non-cognitivism, a non-cognitive approach to knowing things. It's I know it because I feel it deep down inside. How often have we heard that? I know it because I feel it. But feeling is a different category than knowing. Knowing is cognitive. It has a basis for discussion. So this could be a way that human tradition creeps into our thinking. And then common sense. This is pervasive. Actually, this is the one, when I was reading Gilson's book, this is the one that really got to me, because he was saying, we just assume reality. When we face it, we know this is here. And knowing the history of philosophy and the challenge of idealism, which is a view that says, no, all that exists are ideas, and maybe ideas in the mind of some other being like God. He was just bypassing that and asserting that if you see it, it's real. So appearance is reality. That's the very thing that worldly philosophy will challenge. So we'll call that naive realism. Maybe there's a way to support realism. There has to be a way to support realism, because John in his prologue does. But we don't want to be naive about it. So common sense philosophy has definitely influenced some Christian thinking. And then I just put in tradition and custom here, because we tend to think, well, I was raised this way, feels good to me, it's comfortable, most people I know think this way, act this way. I don't know why you would question it. But then we are faced, especially in our day, in a multicultural context. Other people have traditions too, and they feel just as strongly as I do about my traditions. So what happens when traditions clash? And there's no other basis than that's the way I was raised. So people might fall into skepticism about their own tradition at that point. Or they could maybe fall into prejudice. Those people are wrong, I'm right. So those are undesirable effects, right? So this is, I think, some of what Paul could be warning against when he's talking about hollow and deceptive philosophy and human tradition and the basic principles of this world. I've put the alternatives to theism on here. Monism, all that exists is one, and this comes in several forms. It could be all is one in its matter, like secular humanism. All is one in its spirit, like some Eastern religions. Platonic dualism. So I put dualism there. Two things that are eternal, matter and spirit, are co-eternal, which is different than substance dualism, that there's a body and a soul. That's not the same as metaphysical dualism. And then I put the alternatives in ethics. Deontology says there is no good that is objective that we could all know. There's just doing your duty. This is Kantian ethics. Duty for duty's sake. That's an alternative. And then consequentialism is probably the dominant ethics of our day. Do it because it feels good. Pleasure is the good. And it could be individual pleasure, ethical egoism, I'm looking out for number one, or it could be collective pleasure, like utilitarianism, communism, get the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest number of people. So these are all, I would say, basic principles of this world. So this is bad philosophy. All right, now remember to write down your questions. You're getting like a mini lesson in philosophy today. All right, I have Christianity in philosophy here. Why is that? When I study the history of philosophy, which is I have this 5-year plan for myself. I just completed year 1 today, to study the history of philosophy very deeply so that I can see connections of ideas. Why does this happen? Actually, I want to know, why did we get where we are today? Why are we here? What is the history of ideas that led to where we are here? And I'm going to be honest, the history of Christianity in the history of ideas has been sort of frustrating, because what happens in early Christianity is Christianity begins in the context of Greek dualism as well as Hebrew thinking. So the Greek dualism is Plato and Aristotle. So they immediately, the early church fathers are having to figure out, what do we do with this philosophy stuff? What do we do with these famous philosophers? Tertullian, an early church father, said, what has Jerusalem to do with Athens? What does revealed religion have to do with these worldly philosophies, right? Some philosophers said they should be married. And so in studying the history of philosophy, you see that some thinkers, consciously or unconsciously, married the philosophy of Plato to Christianity. St. Augustine, one of the first Christian philosophers, kind of does this. And then it gets picked up by others and held on to. So unexamined assumptions from worldly philosophy get into Christianity, and they're still with us. So that critical thinking, we have to think critically and separate those two. Aristotle and Christianity are married through thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. He basically just takes Aristotle and says, he's about right, he just needs scripture, let's put it there. And it's very frustrating because you're like, no, but Aristotle's not a theist, he's a dualist, and dualistic thinking is now in here. Descartes, sometimes Descartes gets married to Christianity in what's called foundationalism. Immanuel Kant gets married to Christianity. So a lot of times, Thomas Reid, these thinkers are trying to say, well, look, these guys are really good. There's some truth here, and Christianity is true too, so truth is truth, right? Let's put them together. But it seems like we need to be able to sort through what is actually true and what is an assumption that is not supported by reason. So these things we do when we marry Christianity and worldly philosophy leads to fideism in the church. And fideism in the church, I think, leads to skepticism in the world. So when we can't show what we're claiming to be true, people turn away. And then they say we can't know, right? So that's why I'm addressing a Christian crowd with this topic. I wouldn't take this topic to a secular crowd because they're just going to be like, you guys are just talking. What do you know? All right, let's talk about good philosophy. Finally, right? Let's get to the positive part. All right. Now, think critically about this too, because I could be wrong. I am still learning. So what I'm going to say is that I think this is true, that there's this principle of clarity that is part of philosophy. Some things are clear, and it's part of Scripture. That part I'm not willing to let go of. But what I am willing to let go of is that I've gotten to clarity and I can show it to you. That part, maybe I can do what I can do, and you can test it, and we can grow together in that. But I'm not willing to let go of this principle of clarity. All right, so let's look at philosophy from a Christian perspective. Now, I'm assuming Christianity. I'm not proving it. If we were going to do good philosophy as Christians, what would it look like? So remember, philosophy is an area. It has to do with foundational questions. So what are the foundational answers that Christianity would provide? How do we know? What would Christians say about how do we know? I'm going to suggest something through the Word. But what does that mean, the Word? Is it just the Bible? I can't take the Bible to my secular classroom. So there's got to be something more than that. So how do we know things? Metaphysics. God exists, right? God is eternal. Everything else is created. Human beings are created. Human beings are created in the image of God, right? So there's a lot of this we can do from philosophy. We don't have to go to the Bible. This is called general revelation, right? Ethics. What would Christianity say is the good, the goal of life? Maybe I'm just going to leave that out there for you to think about. I'm not going to say it. You think about this. What would be the ethical foundation of Christianity? What is the good, the goal of life? All right, how about this? I've picked out a verse that you've heard today already. What is the attitude of Christian philosophy, or Christians doing philosophy? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, which includes your mind, your soul, and your strength, right? Your whole being. And what does that look like, to love God with your whole being? Remember that passion that's involved in pursuing wisdom? The method of philosophy. Since the method has to do with the critical use of reason, I'm going to suggest that a Christian application of this would be taking every thought captive that's raised up against the knowledge of God. We have to look at other views critically and test them. So all of those worldly philosophies, can we show where they are mistaken? That would be good philosophy, right? Application. Be prepared in season and out of season. And how do you get prepared? You have to be discipled, right? Discipline. Part of this is preparation. I'm anticipating you're going to ask me questions that's going to help me to grow and help me to become more clear next time I do something like this. So you have to be prepared, and we have to be taught. And we have to look at ourselves. Do I know what I ought to know? Am I prepared to teach others? If not, should I get prepared to teach others? And then the philosophical system that we should have, we should know the truth, and probably the whole truth in all of its fullness. And the truth will set you free. Set you free from what? Falsehood, false philosophy, bad philosophy. So if you know the truth, you won't be subject to false philosophy. And we want to construct a whole system of Christian truth. And this is going to apply to all of life, every aspect of life, every institution of culture, the family, church, the state, business, economy, media, social media, everything. Do we have a system of truth that we can take out there and that is answering the questions of the world? And then sanctify them by thy truth. Thy word is truth. Thy word, here's the word again. The word is the logos. What is this logos? So I'm going to suggest, instead of going to Aristotle and Plato and Descartes and Kant and Reid and all these philosophers to figure out how to do philosophy, I'm going to suggest we go to John's prologue. In the prologue to the Gospel of John, he gives us a template. I don't think actually I gave a paper 2 weeks ago that I suggested he was sort of saying, here's how we could do philosophy and answer the questions the Greeks were asking. But he gives us a template, and it's very beautiful and rich, and you can think about this for the rest of your life. I just started to get into this, but thinking about the logos. The word is the logos, and this logos is very full and rich. In fact, the Greek philosophers from the time of Heraclitus to the time of John's Gospel, they were looking for this thing, the logos. What they were recognizing is that there's a logos in me, reason, the light of man, and there's a logos in the world, the laws of nature. There's an order, we can't explain it. And how does my mind fit the order of the world? And John seems to be answering, hey, I got the thing you're looking for, that logos, I have it. And he talks about the word and truth. So I was looking at Socrates in my talk I did 2 weeks ago, and he has this analogy between light and the things that we see. We don't look directly at the sun, especially during the time of an eclipse. It'll ruin our eyes, right? But if we don't have the sun, then we can't understand what's in front of us. So light is the thing that mediates between the sun and the things we want to see. So light is this mediator, and he called that light logos. Logos is the mediator between the source of being and the beings that we see. And so John seems to be using that metaphor of the mediator. The logos is the mediator, I'm just going to say that. But in every aspect that he talks about the logos as eternal. He was with God and he was God. He talks about the logos in man as light. It's that by which we see. So we don't look at God directly. We can't see God, he's invisible, right? But we can see God through the things that he's made, and everything reveals God. So we have this source of understanding that we can understand the things that he's made through the logos. So the logos is in the world as natural laws and in nature, and it's in us as moral law too. So John gives us the logos in the world, the logos in ourselves, and he also talks about logos in Scripture, the word written. And the word is written because of our need for redemption. So that's the part where we're not doing philosophy anymore. We're now doing theology when we get into the Scriptures and the word incarnate. The word came to his own and he was rejected. He's actually rejected at every level. He's rejected in humans as reason, logicide. That's the killing of the logos. It's also deicide, the killing of God. It's rejected in nature. We don't see it. Now, Heraclitus, this is really super interesting. He was a Greek philosopher, and he recognized the logos is all around us, and he was very excited about this. The logos, the laws of nature, the world is understandable, but guess what? Men are deaf to the logos. And he's depicted in Raphael's painting The School of Athens, and he's at the very front, and he's kind of sitting there brooding. And I kind of think he's brooding because he sees the logos and others don't, and he's frustrated about this. And I think John is reminding us, hey, the logos is all around you. Wisdom cries out in this square, right? The logos is everywhere, but men are deaf to the logos. So I think that's where Romans comes in. Romans 1:20. where Paul is talking about the judgment that's on man because, hey, the Logos is all around us, but we don't see it. The eternal power and divine nature of God are clearly revealed so that men are without excuse. We could know it, but we don't know it. And so I think that's why we need redemptive revelation. This is a clear revelation of God for all humans to see, but humans in their fallenness don't see it. And so God comes to us again through the scriptures, and he comes to us again incarnate to redeem us. He comes full of grace and truth, right? So he's redeeming us from falsehood to truth, right? Just a few more notes. I want to leave it a moment for questions, but I put some things here. Sometimes we talk about faith and philosophy. Some of the big philosophy journals, the Journal of Faith and Philosophy. What is the relationship between those? Anselm, an early Christian philosopher in the 1100s, said, I believe in order that I may understand. So he thinks belief comes first, understanding later. There's another guy named Abelard. I like his version better. He says, I understand, so I believe. You can only believe what you understand, right? If I say Blix are grew, and you're like, I believe that. And I say, what do you mean, Blix are grew? And you're like, I have no idea, but I believe it. This is like a meaningless statement, right? So it seems like understanding comes first, and then we believe it because we get it. We understand it. What about the relationship between philosophy and apologetics? What are those? Because I've been in both camps, and they're kind of different. So I suggest, and I could be wrong, that philosophy is offensive. We are trying to understand what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of human beings, and developing that, whereas apologetics is more defense, giving a defense, protecting the faith. So offense and defense, but they go together. And the idea of taking every thought captive is one thing we do in apologetics, but you need the tools of philosophy to do that. So you can maybe test that, see if it's true. And then another thing is philosophy of religion. I've been involved in philosophy of religion since I started. This is really a fascinating area. You could think about this. There's popular religion, where most people live, and this is concerned with practical and psychological needs, like prayer and God getting you through the day. Then there's the historical level of religion, where we have creeds and confessions and a deeper awareness of our tradition. Philosophical religion is where there are new challenges addressed from the culture that need to be answered, that aren't answered in the creeds and the confessions yet. So today, the challenges that we face are science and religion. What's the relationship? What's the relationship between faith and reason? Has anyone addressed that in the creeds? What about postmodernism? How do we address that stuff? So these are remaining challenges for good philosophy to address, and I think we can and should do it. All right, last little section here is the implications of clarity. I started with this idea of some things being clear versus nothing is clear. So here's an implication. If we seek to know, if it's clear, then you will know. Does that make sense? If you seek to know, and knowledge is possible, then you will know. So in Hebrews says this, he who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. So this diligence, it's not something that just comes, out of the sky. We have to do something. It's like that pursuit of wisdom. So it seems that if we did diligently seek, then we would be rewarded. What's the reward? Knowing God. Do you want that? Is that part of what is the good for Christians? Man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Seems like that's connected, right? So there may be some objections, like what is clarity? How do we know what's clear? I would say minimally, and we could develop this some more, clarity has to do with something that can't be logically doubted. So it could be objectively clear, but subjectively, I don't see it yet. And it may be because I wasn't seeking to see it. I wasn't trying. What about, how do we know if we've actually gotten to clarity? Well, then we've gotten to a logical necessity, a truth that can't be doubted. Like this, either this or this. I don't know if there's a way to doubt either this or this. Is clarity the same for everyone? This is a good question, right? Because it seems like, what about that uneducated, abused child in Ubangi Bangi that some of you have heard about? Some of you are students of mine. The kid that's in a village somewhere that doesn't have scripture. What about them? Are they held accountable? Well, Heraclitus, he said the Logos is all around us. And if general revelation is clear, then there's something that everyone is held accountable for. I would say it's truth. If there's truth that can be knowable, and you have the tools for knowing, then it seems like, yeah, everyone's held accountable for the same thing. And not everything is clear. But it seems like if basic things are clear, we could go step by step to the things that are not clear, and it won't be hard. So you don't, my professor described going up a staircase. You don't go from the bottom step to the top. That would be hard, right? You go step by step, and each step is not hard. Each step is as difficult as the last one. So if you have a reasoning process going from, let's say, A as A to, I want to go from A as A to the existence of God, there's probably a step-by-step process we can do to get there. You don't have to jump up the stairs. All right, so it seems like humans are held morally accountable for this. Knowing the existence of God, his eternal power and divine nature, and the moral law. Romans chapter 2 talks about the moral law written on the heart. So it seems that if Christians claim to know that God exists, they should be able to show it. And the world is asking for this. Prove it. Right? So I would say the number one job of Christian philosophy is to show that God exists. All right, and I'll pause here to see if you have any questions. And thank you for being patient through all of that. Yes?
When you are in a circle of argument, how do you show that God exists?
It wouldn't get into a circular argument.
Other than the word, not a circular argument, but a circle of argument.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, can you give me an example?
God exists? Because in the beginning you said we need to go beyond just giving them the word. And we do, because that's thrown back in my face continually. Mm-hmm. I strongly stand on the word of God.
Okay.
And I use that as my logic.
I don't think you need to stop there. You need to broaden the word of God to include all of the created order. If the Logos is in the world, this includes everything. Everything screams out, hey, I'm created. I'm not eternal. Think of Psalm 8. The sun is available for everyone to see. The sun is crying out, hey, I'm created. I'm not eternal. Don't worship me. But the history of humans have worshipped the sun, right? So it seems like the created order is crying out that it's created. So we should be able to show that to people. Hey, do you think the sun is eternal? It's finite in size. It's giving off heat. It can't do this forever. It's going to burn out. Oh yeah, I shouldn't worship it, huh? We could take it to the Egyptians. So I think if we had a broader view of what the word was, study that prologue to John. It's deep, it's rich, it's full. It applies to, here's a challenge. Go on Wikipedia and look up all the words that end in ology. I did this the other day, Sunday. I was like, I could list like 15 words that end in ology. That's the Logos, what we study. Sociology, anthropology, biology. This list of words is huge. And I was just blown away. Like, look at what we do. We're naming the creation. That's good philosophy, right? Go and fill the earth and name the creation. That's what we're called to do. So we have been doing that, but we have been doing that not in the name of the word, the Logos, but in the name of the world. So take back all of that study.
How do you think that this way of viewing things informs the way we engage the world? So like missionally, per se?
Yeah, I engage the world every single day in the classroom. My students are not going to let me off the hook. They are not going to let me make any assumptions, and they're going to say, look, you say it's clear, prove it. So I think the way I engage, I listen to what they're actually saying, and I think about their assumptions, because I think part of what we need to do is study bad philosophy to see what are those bad assumptions, and then I try to draw them out. My students have some of these bad assumptions, and once we go over them objectively, and then we start having conversations, and I say, hey, are you assuming empiricism right now? They go, oh yeah, I guess I was. And empiricism never leads to knowledge, but I do want knowledge. So I think patiently, with humility, because you know what? I'm wrong a lot of the times. And in community, I think we can't do this on our own. So I really think the Christian community needs to get on the same page together before we address the world. I mean, we have to do both. But I don't think we can say, hey, world, you're all wrong, when there's so much division in the Christian community. So maybe we need to have an in-house conversation about how we do philosophy, and then we can go to the world. That's kind of why I'm here today.
So are you saying in some ways that you're just defining truth in ways that you can keep pointing back and saying, well, we've talked about what is truth.
I would start with meaning. Meaning is more basic than truth. What do we mean? You use this word human.
Definition.
Yeah, this is how philosophy begins with Socrates. What do you mean? What do you mean? Human. This is a huge topic today. What is a human? What is male and female? Are they even anything? Are they part of biology? Are they part of the soul? And we don't even know what a human is. How do we answer that question? I don't know, did I address?
Well, yeah, definition. And one of my questions was, could you define fideism?
Yes, fideism is the view that you believe without proof, or maybe even in despite proof. Do you know these people are just like, I can't prove it, I don't even understand it, but I believe it anyway. So fideism is like faithism, and it's not real faith. They say faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. The substance is the underlying support, and there's evidence for things unseen. It's not empirical evidence, it's rational evidence. So faith and reason can't be separated.
And on the next paper, could you put the definitions of these basic?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That's a good suggestion. I should put a little glossary. Good point. Okay.
The courses I took, we came to a little different conclusion about these bad philosophies. Now, empiricism, in its strong form, yes, leads to nonsense, and so does rationalism. But I would think in the soft forms, knowledge through the senses, like we do astronomy.
Right.
So we're seeing
Yes.
stuff. So we're gaining knowledge that
Good.
way.
Okay.
Rationalism, we can then reason, okay, the universe had a beginning, and therefore it had a beginner.
Okay, good. So in other contexts, I talk about the distinction between strong evidence and weak evidence, or justification. So things like astronomy leads to a high probability of truth, but not certainty. Strong justification, we want certainty, so we don't want probably God exists. Philosophy is looking for, I know this is, everyone hates me for this, certainty. What? You can't get it? Are you sure? Are you sure? So certainly I can't know one of these. All right, this is my challenge, because I've heard this 4 times in the last 2 weeks. I'm going to make a little blog post about certainty, about what is knowledge. So if you go to my website, give me a couple weeks, because we're at the end of the semester, I'm going to write a paper on what is knowledge, and does knowledge involve certainty? Okay, it's a throwdown now, because I feel like if I've said it, I should show it, right? So if you know it, you should show it. So now I feel like I should show it. Okay, maybe we could pause here, because I got the minute mark, I got the sign. One more question.
Is your blog post
Yes, that stands for retrieval philosophy, and I thank Dr. Fergus for encouraging me to make that. So yeah, that's my website. All right, thank you all. Have a good day. I hope the rest of the day is good.